The Ashkenaz Festival, North America's largest celebration of Jewish music, arts, and culture, is happening at venues across Toronto from August 27th to September 2nd. Witness diverse musical expressions of the Jewish experience, from klezmer and Yiddish styles to Sephardic, Mizrahi, Falasha music, and much more. Go to ashkenaz.ca for venue and ticket information.
That's what it sounded like last week in Windsor, Ontario, outside a Jewish National Fund of Canada's Negev Dinner fundraising event, where inside, donors and patrons heard former Prime Minister Stephen Harper as the keynote speaker, while outside, some of the pro-Palestinian protesters carried signs that read JNF funds genocide. 2 days later, on Saturday, August 10th, the Canadian Revenue Agency formally published the government's decision to revoke JNF Canada's charitable status, a status which it's had for more than 60 years. The note appeared in the Canada Gazette, making it effective immediately. This caught the charity by surprise. Blindsided them, is how JNF Canada CEO Lance Davis called it. Only a couple of weeks ago, JNF Canada told everybody, including its donors, that the tax department was planning to take away its charitable status, meaning it can no longer issue receipts for donations and might have to wind down its operations. But the charity assured everybody it was going to be business as usual while it tried to work things out with the tax department. They thought they had more time. After all, it's been about 10 years already since the charity began its disputes with the CRA, although JNF Canada said it's fixed what Ottawa asked it to do. For instance, by 2016, the JNF cut all ties with its Israeli head office and changed what and where it funds projects, so it would no longer be putting projects on IDF military bases or in the West Bank. Now, the charity accuses the tax department of being biased and causing terrible damage to its reputation, and it blames the auditors and the Minister of National Revenue for caving in to political pressure after complaints from Canadian pro-Palestinian activists who've been trying to shut the charity down for years. The charity will apply now for a quick judicial review to stop the revocation order, and eventually is ready to take the whole case to the Federal Court of Appeal. Some tax experts think the federal government simply ran out of patience.
They've given them 10 years to get their house in order, and now it's about the question is, did they give them another 2 or 3 years? And I would say across the board, CRA generally just gives groups far too much time. Sometimes it's 10 years, sometimes it's 20 years. And I think the public who is donating to these groups does expect that they're going to be complying with the rules.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, August the 14th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News. Let me give you a little bit of background about JNF in Canada. The latest figures from 2022 show it had $31 million in assets, $12 million in annual revenue, 44 staff, and attract some of the Jewish community's top philanthropists as supporters, including the Bellsbergs, the Vickers, the Lubovics, Sylvan Adams, the Aspers, and the Goodmans. It's got a full event calendar ahead, including golf tournaments, Negev dinners, trips to Israel, and some of the projects in the pipeline include a new Torah scroll being written for the October 7th victims, rebuilding Kibbutz Kisufim in the Gaza border area, and repairing apartments for Holocaust survivors. The CRA is supposed to release all the paperwork to explain why it took this decision now, but we haven't got that yet. The website of the government does list a few reasons why it took the charitable status away. Number 1, it says the JNF wasn't doing only charity. Number 2, the charity actually didn't supervise directly or control the projects that it funds in Israel. That it gave money to other charities which weren't qualified to get it, and the JNF Canada didn't keep the proper paperwork. So what does this mean? What does it mean for other Canadian charities? I'm joined by Mark Bloomberg, a lawyer specializing in charity law who runs a popular database examining 86,000 Canadian charities.
Ellen, it's very nice to join you.
Well, I'm glad to have you because we want to unpack the story from last month that broke about the JNF telling everyone that it was probably going to be having its license, be a charity, revoked by Revenue Canada, or the CRA now. And that sent shockwaves across the country, in the Jewish community, for many reasons. What went through your mind immediately when you heard this?
Well, I'm a little bit concerned that with all the issues going on right now with anti-Semitism in Canada, with Israel having tremendous security issues and things like that, well, this is a bit of a distraction from some very important things that are going on right now. And that doesn't mean that I wish CRA wasn't revoking them, because I don't know, and no one knows really what all the details are, at least in the public. But yeah, I'm worried that it could be a bad thing for the 1,000 Jewish charities that we have here in Canada, who have about $12 billion in assets. So we're not talking a small community. We're not talking a few people. And this could be a negative thing. And of course, I just don't know very much, because the charity hasn't released those letters from CRA, which would probably give us something like 100 or 200 pages of information, which would add significantly to our understanding about the situation. But yeah, I would say that historically, we have had some compliance issues within the Jewish community. I think we're aware of it, in that, there was a number of cases. Like, there's 5 cases in Canada of organizations getting in trouble for providing funds to foreign entities. And 4 of those 5 cases involve Jewish organizations. Okay, so I'm concerned that there has been some compliance issues. There's a lot of groups sending money to the US, there's a lot of groups sending money to the UK, and far fewer compliance issues. And so, unfortunately, and I put up a lot of these letters on my website at, canadiancharitylaw.ca. So if people want to actually read the actual letters, they can do that when it has been revoked, and one can request them from CRA. But, you can make up your own mind as to whether those charities were doing the right thing or not doing the right thing, and all that sort of stuff.
I'm going to stop you right there. Once you brought them up, what are those 4 charities?
Essentially, I've looked back at 30 years, 550 revocations of all types of charities as a result of audit. And there's about 54 Jewish charities revoked. Okay, 54. Now, just to give you an idea, with 1,000 Jewish charities—
I thought you said there was 4.
No, 4 just dealing with foreign activities is the main issue. Okay, but there's 54 Jewish charities revoked over a 30-year period. So it's about 2 a year. But to give you an idea, that I think it's about 11 or something Muslim charities revoked in the same 30 years. So it's a very high number of revocations. And I've read through all the letters, and I haven't seen anywhere like CRA, oh, wow, how can you be revoking this? This doesn't make any sense. There's usually a huge number of issues, like 10, 20, 30, 40 issues for each charity as to why they're being revoked. And it makes some sense as to why they're being revoked. But so the point is that there's been a lot of revocations. I don't want to start naming names, because some of them, by the way, CRA has allowed them to become charities back again. Okay. CRA is not trying to revoke charities, because if they are, they're doing a terrible job, because some years they're revoking 2, some 10, some 20. But with 86,000 charities, and so many charities doing some things they shouldn't be doing, to revoke 2 or 10 charities is a joke in the big picture. What it means is CRA is allowing a lot of charities to get away with some really problematic behavior. And I'm not talking about JNF, because I don't know what they've been involved with. I can just read their press releases and some news reports, which may or may not be accurate, and, surmise as to some things. But really, until we see those CRA letters, we won't really know.
Why can't we see the CRA letters? Why aren't they being made public by the government, since it's public money, public charity, taxpayers' tax receipts that are being given to the benefit of philanthropists?
Unfortunately, we have a system in Canada that is better for those who are trying to abuse charities than for those who are donors to charity and care about charity. We have a system of secrecy. So there's only 2 people or 2 groups that could release those letters right now. There's CRA, and there's the organization who the revocation letter was sent to. And if CRA releases them, they go to prison. Okay, because that's a criminal offense for them to release it. So the only group that can release those letters is the charity that has received the letters. Okay, once the charity is revoked, then CRA could release them, but that might be in 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Because otherwise, there's all this unknown suspicion.
Absolutely.
Where there's smoke, there's fire, and that is actually worse than coming clean with it.
I know that I've read some of the pieces that JNF has put out. They put out a press release, and the day before that, they sent something to their supporters. I think that they've tried to sort of say this is about bias. They have said, we're not saying CRA is anti-Semitic, but they're saying that basically a lot of pressure put on CRA and all this. Again, the whole charity system in Canada is not based on JNF. It's based on 86,000 charities, 32,000 religious charities. It's based on hospitals, universities, all sorts of different organizations, ones that operate here, ones that operate outside of Canada. If that's the case, we're going to have to decide, what do we want? Do we want a very permissive system that allows you to basically do anything you want? Then you can't complain about other charities doing things in Gaza or other things that you don't like. Or do we want to have a system that is so complicated and convoluted that no one can ever do anything? No, I don't think you want that either. So you don't want either extreme. We want a balanced system. And right now it's out of balance. Very few charities being revoked. Tremendous secrecy around a lot of things and if it was a year or two to knock out a charity, I'd be okay waiting. But it's sometimes 10 to 20 years before the charities, after CRA finds out significant non-compliance. But yeah, no, the system in Canada, unfortunately, the Income Tax Act has certain confidentiality provisions that treat charities like regular taxpayers, like you and me. And I don't mind regular taxpayers. You don't put their tax returns online like some countries do. I don't mind that. But charities that have huge tax subsidies and things like that, it makes sense that there is more information. So some things are available. And CRA has made it very clear. If they have evidence, and I'm not talking about JNF here, I'm talking about other organizations, that a group is supporting terrorism, they cannot tell the public about it. That's it. I mean, if it's that bad, then it seems to me that we need to change the rules. And it doesn't cost any money to change it, just to allow CRA, if there's significant non-compliance, like serious non-compliance, to allow them to actually say something to the public in the same way the UK and the Australian governments do when there's significant non-compliance.
Why did it take, from what I understand, so many years for this step in the CRA review process for the JNF? Is that normal?
Unfortunately, it is somewhat normal. It's not the worst I've seen, but it is actually sometimes, yeah, it's a big problem.
The JNF says it's been a victim of bias, that has sort of public pressure has been the factor in them being the subject of an audit. What do you make of that? Does the CRA have a responsibility to listen to these letters from people, or do they just do strictly on numbers?
No, not at all. I think that there are a lot of charities that are being complained about. I mean, you have Christian evangelical charities that, believe terrible things about gay people. You don't think there are people complaining about them constantly for sometimes decades? Of course there are. But CRA doesn't even audit charities in many cases based on just public complaints, because most of the public complaints are highly politicized and not, shall we say, fair. But even if it was a fair person sending it in, most of the people don't know anything about charity law. Charity law is a very sort of specialized area. You're either doing it right or you're not doing it right. And CRA, so they get tons of what they call tips. I'm sure they ignore 99% of them. But what I will say is some of the Muslim organizations where there have been all sorts of allegations about their conduct have said the exact same thing. They said this is Islamophobia. And in fact, they managed to put pressure onto CRA that they got the taxpayers' ombudsperson to do a huge report, which is very worthwhile to read. He reviewed gigabytes of material, thousands of documents, and he found that, no, there wasn't Islamophobia, okay? And I think if he did the same, he'd find there isn't anti-Semitism. But hey, if someone wants to do that, more than welcome, encourage the taxpayers' ombudsperson to look at it. So I think we always have to remember the bigger picture. The bigger picture isn't just Jewish people in Canada. Like I often hear, we want to send people to Israel. We want it to be free. We want la, 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 all this stuff. Okay, great. But there's rules about what charities can and cannot do. And many times these trips to Israel, for example, are not what they should be. But is CRA mainly concerned with trips to Israel? No. There's like, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Jews in Canada. They're more concerned with if every Muslim wants to take a trip or two to, do the Hajj, which is a, religious right or responsibility or something, and charities were to pay for that. Can you imagine what the cost would be of that? So I think we have to
that the taxpayers of Canada would be
80% paying for. Yeah. So I think we have to get beyond just looking at ourselves and saying this is as if everything's about us. It's not. There are rules and there are subsidies. And if you or I donate to a charity, we're probably getting 50 cents on a dollar. But there's a lot of wealthy people getting 80 or 90 cents on the dollar when they're donating. What that means is their money's going to Israel for very good stuff in Israel, but it's only 10 cents their money, 90% federal and provincial money. And somehow the CRA is supposed to sit back for 100 years when they find out there's a problem, but that's not their role. Their role is to audit charities, to let charities in only if they're charitable, and then audit them once they're in. And I think actually CRA needs to do a much better job. Much more groups they need to do. They used to do 800 a year. It's gone down to 150. I would encourage Jewish people, if you care a lot about Israel, to look at what's actually going on here in Canada. Look at the money that is going to Hamas, directly or indirectly, right from Toronto, and ask questions about what's going on here. And it's not that CRA doesn't want to stop it, they're trying, but they're being attacked constantly by, for example, groups saying they're Islamophobic because they went after Muslim groups, that they had allegations of all sorts of problems with them. And I'm just saying, it's going to be one set of rules for all groups, and you've got to decide what you want. If you want a permissive environment, you're going to get it. If you want to have more scrutiny, accountability, transparency, then it's absolutely possible to do. But right now we have what we have in Canada. I think that in the end, of course, once we see the letters, I mean, I might read these letters and say, oh my God, I can't believe CRA wrote that. And those letters should be public for everyone, especially people thinking of donating to this organization. You should read those letters before you do anything basically that could result in you regretting later. And according to the 2023 filings for JNF, they have about 20, I think it was something like about 30 million in cash, and so it's not like they need the money or they're going to go under tomorrow. They've got enough money for about 1.5 to 2 years of operation, even if they didn't take in any money. And there are other Jewish organizations right now who are in financial need. They have been ignored because of the terrible situation in Israel and the Middle East. And they're
right.
Also,
everybody's donating to Israel instead of local charities.
So,
that's right.
In a year's time, if a whole bunch of groups, 20, 30 groups go under, meanwhile, we've been spending all of our time thinking about JNF, then I think we'll regret it. There's a lot of things going on. And with these 1,000 Jewish charities, I would rather that one focus on with the Jewish charities that don't want to be involved in 10 or 20-year audits, but want to just do the right thing and get on with their work, do their fundraising, do their programming and stuff. Many of them do need to improve the standard of compliance that they're involved with. That's really important. And many of the things can easily be fixed. Some of the stuff's not so easy to fix, but many groups are just completely oblivious to the issues. I mean, even JNF, they're supposed to file every single year a financial statement with Corporations Canada because they're a soliciting corporation quite clearly. And they haven't in 10 years filed a financial statement with Corporations Canada. It's a very simple thing to do. It takes to do 10 of them would take maybe half an hour. Okay. You're just uploading PDFs to a website and they haven't done it. So I don't know what the story is, but it'll be interesting to see. And by the way, CRA is not going to mention that in their letters because CRA is not concerned with your filings with Corporations Canada. That's not their problem. They're concerned only with the Income Tax Act. So but there were 4 things that were raised. The lack of direction control, that's sending money to Israel, 10, 20 million, and then not having the 8 measures of control that need to be in place. And I've heard from so many groups, oh, we do direction and control. We know what we're doing. And they completely don't know, in some cases, what they're doing. Now, I don't know if JNF, if it's just one thing that CRA is complaining about, or it's 8 things. I don't know. But when we have those letters, we'll know. Non-charitable activities, that could mean a lot of things. That was the 3rd thing that JNF said is not fair that they said this. It could be the military thing, building like facilities on military bases could be a problem. And the 4th thing was fail to maintain adequate books and records. So not only do you do good work, but you have to be able to show 3-5 years later that you've done good work.
The clock now is on pause, right? In terms of the revocation, because the JNF has gone to the Federal Court of Appeal and they're going to take that avenue before the government's allowed to do anything. Is that how I understand? Is that right?
It's not exactly correct, more or less. Okay, generally CRA's policy is they allow these charities the ability to appeal. Which could involve an appeal within CRA that can take a year or 2. Then when that doesn't work out, then you can appeal to the Federal Court of Appeal, then to the Supreme Court, et cetera, which could take another amount of time. So yeah, they generally don't. But in some cases, they do actually revoke the groups and then say, look, if the Court of Appeal says, that you're actually entitled to be a charity, then we'll put you back in. So I don't support the CRA policy of waiting another year or 2 or 3 when there's a very high likelihood, if you're looking at historical cases, that the entity will be revoked unless there's a negotiation or something. But again, if they haven't been successful in negotiating in 10 years a solution, I'm not sure there's going to be success in the next 6 months or a year. How it could get to this is shocking in my mind, but the point is, it is what it is. And this audit started 10 years ago. And by the way, I would say most people only knew about this probably about a week ago. even though the letter from CRA came over a month ago to JNF. And in fact, that letter is just a renewal of a letter sent in 2019 saying, JNF, we want to revoke you. So I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just saying, factually speaking, how you handle a situation like this, the demeanor, your ability, your willingness to make changes. When I saw that JNF publicly said that they're being audited by CRA around 2019, but they didn't say they were being revoked, at least I didn't see that. And they said that they had stopped doing stuff on military bases 2 years after they stopped, after the audit began. That doesn't show a great deal of urgency in their wanting to change. So there's 5,000 full-time employees of Jewish organizations in Canada. There are 6,400
Jewish charitable organizations.
Yeah, Jewish charitable organizations, and another 6,400 part-time people. There's a lot in these 1,000 organizations, and a lot of revenue, a lot of expenditures, a lot of good programming they're doing, a lot of things. They need to look at their compliance regime, and instead of saying, well, I have a lawyer on the board who's a personal injury lawyer and he's going to take care of everything, they really need to look at the stuff. We've got like lists on our website of top 30 CRA concerns. And if you pay attention to these things, it'll make your lives a lot easier in the future. And I am thinking the Jewish community is vitally important in Israel, in Canada, also to Israel, but in Canada to the life of Jews here. So the sustainability of the Jewish community is vital. So it's really important that we make sure that these organizations are following the rules and then going to be more likely to be around in 10 or 20 years. And by the way, if you don't want to follow so many rules, you can be a nonprofit, not a charity, and there's far less rules. And you just can't issue tax receipts, but it's not that different. There's a lot of Jewish nonprofits that are charities too. I'm worried that this could negatively affect not only the Jewish community in Canada, but it could affect all of the regulators around the world are following the story that deal with charities. Okay, so Australia, UK, US, they're all aware of this now, and it could affect JNFs in other countries as well. It can affect Jewish organizations, just the idea of if this becomes a big story, it could be negative for the Jewish community. And I'm always worried about, Chilul Hashem and people, if you've got some people who are diehard BDS people, that's one thing. If you've got people who Israel can do no wrong, that's another thing. But most people are not in those two camps. They're in between. And I'm worried that something like this is going to send the wrong message. There's enough bad things said about the Jewish community that are completely untrue. So I think I'm just trying to prevent more of these types of scenarios. We've had too many of them in the past. So if groups can pay attention to their compliance, learn about what you need to do, it's so much easier to just do it right than it is to try to fix it later. Sometimes you can't fix it even. So that's my sort of takeaway from it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. Now, the JNF Canada charity isn't the only Jewish organization that lost its charitable status this weekend. Ottawa also stripped the status from the Ne'eman Foundation of Canada. They direct donations to projects in Canada and Israel, and lost it for some of the same reasons as the JNF, but also because the government says it didn't issue donation receipts and didn't file proper paperwork, even though Ottawa warned it to do so. The Israeli head office of Ne'eman is located in Shiloh, a West Bank settlement. The Canadian office is in Toronto. The Canadian branch has recently changed its name to Emonim. They were also audited back in 2019. Now, the CRA may soon have to rule on the future of several other important Canadian Jewish charities because activists are campaigning to shut down Mizrahi Canada, United Israel Appeal, UJA's federations in Toronto and Montreal, and Toronto's Beis Yaakov schools. The CEO of UIA Canada, Steve Schulman, calls the complaints bad faith. And one JNF donor who I spoke to says it all feels and smells like anti-Semitism, especially when Ottawa allows Canadian charities who fund terror organizations like Samidoun and the Muslim Brotherhood to keep operating. The CJN Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music was composed by Dov Beck-Levine. As always, let me know what you think of this story. We're at ebessner@thecjn.ca.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.